Thank you, Mr. President, and I too want to echo gratitude, or start with gratitude. Take a deep breath. Shift the energy in the room. Thank you. So I want to thank Councilor Bach for your leadership, of course, for shepherding us through this process. I also want to thank Central staff who worked incredibly hard as well. I want to thank my Chief of Staff, I can't look at you, who's been fighting the fight, even though there have been at moments very political layers. And she's carried herself with grace, class, to do the job and get the work done. So thank you. I also want to thank, of course, not just my Chief of Staff, the rest of my team as well, but Ellie, you took the lead, so thank you. I, of course, want to thank the administration, the budget office, Justin and his team, IGR, everyone for working really hard with us to try to get us to a good place. I also want to thank the residents and the advocates and all the folks who showed up, not just last year, but all the folks who showed up this year, who called us, who emailed us, who texted us, who exercised their civic duty by attempting, of course, to engage in the process and to hope that this budget would respond and reflect what they were demanding of us. I want to thank them, because last year was a very difficult year for many, of course, but for those in the brown and black community who experienced George Floyd, there was an additional layer there. And I constantly heard that this particular budget cycle, how the trauma still exists for them. So I want to thank them for continuing to come back to push for a whole host of systemic inequities, particularly around policing reform. I also want to stress, and I stressed this at the last council meeting, that I've been consistent. For 2 years, I voted against the BPS budget. In 1 year, I stood up there by myself, and I was the only no vote against the Boston Public Schools budget because I did not think it went far enough to close the systemic inequities that exist within BPS and to guarantee every family in the city of Boston access to an excellent education, which I also shared is near and dear to me. I often say, but for the grace of God and the BPS education I got at 5 BPS schools, all of which were excellent, I would not have been successful, and I definitely wouldn't be standing in this role. The second year, I voted against BPS for the same reasons. This year, I'm voting against BPS for the same reasons. Last year, I voted against the operating budget. This year, I'm voting against the operating budget for the same reasons, actually maybe for some additional reasons. And so I want to make it clear that this isn't political. I know folks in the media space and others will try to frame it as such. It isn't. For me, this is about doing the job and making sure that you're standing up, most importantly, for those who are unseen, unheard, and who do not feel as though their voice is given the weight it deserves in these processes and that their budget reflects what they're demanding of us. Someone remarked that it's easy to vote no. It actually isn't. If it were, we would have a 1/12 budget a long time ago. It's very difficult, actually, to vote no. I think it's actually easy to vote yes, because when you vote yes, you can say that we're making progress, that systemic reform is soon to be accomplished. I can't wait. Thousands of Bostonians cannot wait. I stressed this last year. For generations in this city, people have been waiting for systemic reform, for greater access to opportunity, greater access to excellent schools, greater access to good housing. There are neighborhoods, including in my current district, that have been under-resourced and under-invested in for generations. And they have been demanding that a budget respond appropriately. So similar to them, I say, I can't wait for systemic reform. I cannot wait for police reform. If not in the moment and after George Floyd, then when? When do we push for a department to become more transparent, more accountable, for a budget to be reined in because even the department itself agrees it is not sustainable? And it isn't. It's a $400 million budget with a $70 million overtime budget that keeps going up. I don't think that we should wait for the next elected mayor to address that or to address our Boston public schools or to address the public health crisis we're seeing at Mass and Cass. I also want to say that I don't think the families that are in touch with us around various school infrastructure, and I'll name one, the Sarah Greenwood School in my district, they have been pushing for a swing space. This is a school that still has asbestos in it, doesn't have adequate play space. No family, none of us would send our children there. These families are demanding better infrastructure there. I don't think that they should have to wait. I don't think that folks who are dealing with the crisis down at Mass and Cass, and I refer to it as that because that is the area where it's concentrated, should have to wait or wait for a commitment to meet with the acting mayor and the administration for their ideas to be implemented in response to the public health crisis we're seeing. I don't think I should have to wait as a mother of two boys who have a 5% chance of getting into a high-quality Boston public school compared to certain downtown neighborhoods where it's 80%. I don't think any of us should have to wait for systemic reform. So when I vote no, that's what that message is from me. It's saying we shouldn't have to wait. It's our job in this body, in this system, to make bold changes and to push for a budget. That's the main vehicle we have as counselors, to push for a budget that will respond to those needs, respond to those demands, and meet those needs adequately. Last year, I, along with many colleagues on this council, including our acting mayor, voted against the budget because it didn't go far enough to reduce and reallocate the police budget or propose a real plan to rein in the overtime spending. This year, the council is actually being asked to consider a budget that isn't much different, that provides actually no strategy to actualize promised reductions in overtime. Obviously, our chair has agreed to that. And I remain wholly unconvinced that the city will be able to actualize their promised $21 million overtime reduction by adding officers to the department, especially when this problem is clearly systemic and demands much deeper change. And this is not to suggest our officers are not working hard, they are, or that the civilians in that department are not working hard. This is about departmental reform. And a whole host of officers, captains, previous captains have put forth thoughtful ideas for this department to try to actually implement to rein in these costs, including restructuring the department, restructuring certain units to send them back to the district to allow greater coverage for the calls that we all see and get with respect to police incidents. All of that was never tried in over a year. There is a clinging on to the status quo within this police department. That's the problem. It needs a cultural shift. And it actually needs it more now than ever before because of the cases that continue to come out of this department. It's abundantly clear that we need greater transparency and accountability, that we need to rein this budget in. If the Patrick Rose case, which clearly there will be more facts that come out about that case, which are beyond disturbing, don't push us to push for greater transparency and accountability, then win. I had a conversation with one of our union leaders who called me to personally apologize for attacking me personally. You know what he said to me? I thought he was on desk duty because I thought it was a domestic violence case. This is what we're dealing with in the police department. We have officers on desk duty where other officers say, I thought it was because it was domestic violence. Everyone agrees, including officers within the department, that there needs to be a cultural shift. And the only way we have that happen is if we work together in partnership. And the only way that happens is if a mayor exercises that leadership to get it done. And that is through this budget. That is through real reforms, real policy and cultural changes to back it up. And I refuse to say that we have to wait until the next budget cycle to deal with those issues which continue to actually get worse and are actually worse now than they were last year. This is our job to push this system to do better. And I know we don't have a whole bunch of tools in our toolkit. We'll have some more once this ballot initiative passes, but this is our tool to do it. In addition, Mass and Cass. And I refer to as Mass and Cass not to discount the humanity of folks who are dealing with opioid crisis and substance use disorder or homelessness. I refer to it because that's where it's concentrated. This is an issue that keeps me up at night because I, like many other folks on this body, including members of the task force, also are receiving the calls the emails, the texts, with the growing crisis that continues to get worse. And yes, I know there are additional investments to respond with case management, to do some more at the comfort station. That is not enough. We need a real plan. We need less of defensiveness and a willingness to collaborate. I have sent correspondence, have put ideas on the table, informed by people who've been doing the work, saying that we need a mass and cast chief, a public health professional to help with issues down there. We need a responder unit, everyone working together, preferably the same folks working together. Decentralization of services, people are talking about it. We can actually make it happen if there's a coordinated effort. I have yet to receive any response from the administration to any of that correspondence, absolutely zero. We even got creative and said, let's do a 30-day challenge. That was an idea from a constituent. And one of the requests is if they could meet with our acting mayor. That did not happen. And so continuing to push with what we're dealing with at Mass and Cass, and that is one big reason I remain a no on this budget. And again, a crisis I do not think that we should have to wait for the next elected mayor to deal with. This is growing every single day, even as we sit in this chamber. It is getting worse. And I heard there might be an emergency meeting this morning, I learned from someone outside the system, to try to address that. No collaboration with us in here. Task force, I don't even think meets anymore. There are members of the task force that call me who are just beyond devastated that there's not more collaboration to create impactful solutions to respond. I know our city employees are working hard. I know advocates are working hard. They are overwhelmed. Again, this is where leadership matters. This is also where budget matters. And this is where we can speak up and say, until we get an adequate response from the administration on how they're going to deal with this crisis, we're not going to accept this budget. Because when we do, then the conversation ends. And that's what happened last year. Everyone said we're going to work together. We're going to work on policing reform. We're going to work to rein in that cost. We're going to work to actualize the $12 million that the previous administration admitted that they were going to try to rein in. We realized zero of that. And there has been no movement whatsoever on any of these issues. The same will happen with Mass and Cass if we vote in favor of this budget, because I think that's easier to do. And I'll just end by saying Boston Public Schools continue to get calls and emails about the status of BPS. We lost about 2,000 families. It's the sharpest decline in the last 15 years. And this isn't because families are not happy with this system. I do not think this budget adequately addresses the inequities in terms of access. I do not think this budget adequately addresses the issues we're seeing with our special needs students or English learners. I do not think this budget adequately addresses what we're going to do over the summer. And we're giving them $400 million to figure it out and expecting them to come back with a real plan. That's unacceptable. And it definitely doesn't invest in infrastructure. Parents they're beyond frustrated, and I share that frustration, and I think I'm delivering a little bit of that now for them. They are beyond frustrated. The Sarah Greenwood School I lift up as a great example of this frustration. At the very beginning of COVID, before we knew much about the virus, these families were pushing for a swing space. Over a year later, they still don't have a swing space. Instead, what they're getting is a conversation about ways in which to improve the building itself, piecemeal responses, not systemic, not adequate. And we've been told that there's a plan coming. We've been told that there's a plan coming in terms of looking at our infrastructure as a whole. In our most recent budget session, there's a timeline, we're working on it. Well, when do we get it? We've had over a year. So that frustration exists amongst families. And I think we need to reflect that when saying no to this budget. I know I am, because I'm speaking for those families that do not feel as though they're being represented. And then I'll end with saying, when I first joined the council, I voted yes on a few different budgets. I got calls from the mayor and the administration, worked with the administration to create the Youth Development Fund, worked with Councilor Flaherty and the administration on the CPA, really got some meaningful things done with the previous mayor. But then at one point I said, wait a minute. At what point do we use the power we have in this body to say that business as usual isn't working anymore? The inequities in the city of Boston that so many residents are dealing with are actually getting worse, not better. How does this budget respond? How does this budget respond to the lack of transparency and accountability with our police department? How does this budget respond to the overtime and the fraud within our police department? How does this budget respond and protect our tax-paying dollars? How does this budget respond to the crisis at Mass and Cass? How does this budget respond to closing the systemic inequities that don't just affect low-income people and people of color? That affects the entire city of Boston. It holds us all back from reaching our full potential and our promise as a city. And the only way I think that we really get some movement is if we stand up and say no. Because respectfully, Mr. President, I do not think it's easy to do yes. I tried to get there. I really did. I worked with Councilor Brock, and even she admitted, at least on the policing reform, which I appreciated, it wasn't there. Mass and Cass, I know others remain frustrated, so I'm going to keep working. I appreciate the indulgence. I appreciate you letting me go on a little bit longer. And I hope those who exercised their civic duty over the last year, who texted, called, emailed in the thousands, I want them to know that I heard them loud and clear. And that when you exercise your civic duty, this government should respond. And right now, we're not responding, so I can't even imagine what they're feeling. So I hear them. My vote is a no, because I hear them loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.